All right. All right, we all ready? Yeah? Cool. Thanks for coming, guys. We're calling this Map Shop. My name's Matt Wilson. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Geography, and this is an initiative of the New Mappings Collaboratory and our sort of new sort of development called New Maps Plus, in which we're trying to develop new forms of technology and new forms of pedagogy to go with those kinds of technological practices around mapping using online tools, largely open source tools. And what we're attempting to do today is sort of model and demonstrate a few of these new technologies using some of the local experts that we sort of brought in from the NACIS conference, the North American Cartographic Information Society conference. So while they were in Pittsburgh, we decided to make them kind of our local experts on these kinds of tool sets. So I'm going to turn this over to Rich Donohue, who's going to sort of introduce the flow of today's workshop. We're going to try to run until about 4 o'clock. We're trying to keep it as informal as possible, even though we've got some surveillance going on in the room. But what we're trying to do is really try to show some of the techniques that we're going to be trying to model in this new suite of courses that we're calling New Maps Plus. So I'll turn this over to Rich Donohue.
Hi, thanks for coming. I'm actually in the Department of Geography here. I'm a postdoctoral scholar. So the idea here is that I would start off this workshop and offer a kind of a broad overview, get a lay of the land. We're dealing with a lot of very complicated technologies. Maybe some of you know these already, but we're going to be dropping some buzzwords and some acronyms and this kind of thing. So sometimes it's nice to have a big picture, and I'm calling this more of a roadmap through the workflow and the processes it takes to move from having an idea in the world and wanting to map that. The classic kind of definition of design actually comes from this man, Paul Rand. Sorry, I wanted to not confuse that with Rand Paul. He's a different kind of designer. But Paul, intelligent design. Paul Rand was very influential, brought in Swiss legacy, did a lot of work with IBM. You'd recognize a lot of his work in the iconic kind of logo designs of the 1950s. And he defines this as design as relationships between form and content. So this is a kind of a classic definition of design. And so I want you to think about this one as I ramble on here, and I'm going to extend this a little bit to what this definition that was articulated in the 50s might mean today in the web environment. This is another definition of design I really like. This is a really beautiful book by Frank Chimero called The Shape of Design. It's free, it's online, it's set out in beautiful typography. I recommend reading that. The best design acts as a form of loosely composed responsive movement and seeks to have all the adjacent elements sway together. Very poetic. What he's adding to the form and content there is this idea of movement, so there's action happening as well. Well, what is cartographic design? So real quickly, just what is cartography? And I want to draw our attention to this acknowledgement that mapping has always existed, that we have been mapping since the dawn of time when we were in caves. It's a pretty universal language. They're shown that very young children understand mapping. We all have this kind of hardwired spatial reasoning in ourselves. Cartography is kind of this new academic claiming of certain mapping practices. And we do this with a lot of science, behavioral psychology, and we establish certain rules. So we want to consider both of these things, the mapping practices that everyone can do, that everyone's involved with, and then the academic part that we add to this. So this is the kind of roadmap I'm offering us. This is where the workshop is going to go today. The idea is we start here with, well, beneath this is actual geography out there, right, the world, and we have an idea of something maybe we want to map. I'm going to suggest that we actually have a problem that we want to solve. And there's a suite of practices and technologies we need to move through. So this roadmap is going to walk us through gathering data and thinking critically about that data that will represent that phenomena. We want to represent that in certain ways so we can see it. And then finally, we want to add some interaction or activity in this web environment. And finally, we're going to deploy that out into the web. So this is basically the structure of the subsequent presentations you're going to see by my colleagues here as well. The idea is I'll present this roadmap, and then we're going to dive deeper into all of these things and get into the nitty-gritty there. So I want to suggest that design, in my mind, it always starts with a problem, and it is closely linked with puzzle solving and problem solving. So you can think about the domains you're coming from, what you're interested in, and where those problems come from. And I'll suggest that they always happen spatially and they happen in places. So this is a very geographic way of thinking about design. So for a specific example, a problem might be which restaurants should I eat in or perhaps not eat in, right? Google gives us a very nice big map here, all these different places we might go eat. Maybe we're concerned about tainted food or problems in there, and perhaps there's something we want to avoid. I trust we've all eaten lunch. All right. So to answer this kind of a problem, we went to the Lexington, Lafayette County restaurant inspections, and we pulled this data set that I think it's every restaurant, is that right? Every restaurant and any kind of violations they might have had. And so we said, well, this is a potential data set we could use to answer this problem. So how do we start to move through that now? Well, first we got to open up the data and look at it. The real fancy tool we typically use for this might be Microsoft Excel. Perhaps you've heard of that one. The spreadsheet is actually really a key tool in the web cartographer's toolbox. The better you can get at using either Excel or an open office version of that, the better. So first of all, we see, oh cool, there's the addresses here. This is nice. We can't directly map this, though, just with the addresses. So then we need to do some process of geocoding. And so this is a tool we'll talk about a little bit more, but CartoDB is one option for us just to upload this Excel file, and it can automatically what's called geocode, or find the latitude and longitude value of each of these street addresses. So that's really the first step, is we want to get that lat long value in the data. The next thing we want to do is look at the data and we see, okay, there appears to be some attribute values that are of interest to us in here. We see we've got all these restaurants ranked with a score, assuming higher is better in this case. We see inspection date, and we see a violation list of various violations, and these include like if they found rats running around the restaurant, or there was spoiled food left out, these kind of things. And follow-up required, no. This column doesn't look very interesting for us, but then there's an opening date, so when the restaurant actually opened. So pretty simple data set. So how can we think about using this and moving forward in a mapping process? Data is always the hardest part of any mapping process. It's always the most expensive part. It's key with, you could have a beautifully designed map and slick interactivity, but without good data and meaningful data, the map's really not going to be very valuable. So when dealing with data, we always ask these two questions. What is the level of measurement, and what is the nature of geographic phenomena we want to map? Probably familiar with these sort of things. It's very key. What is the level of measurement? We have these kind of four levels. Nominal, which is categories, right? Do I have fast food restaurants versus high-end restaurants? Do I have Italian versus, this is a nominal category. Ordinal, ranking these, so maybe based off of price range might be an example of ordinal. Interval data and ratio. And so when we think back to our data set that we were just looking at, we can think, okay, we can start anticipating how these levels of measurement are going to be applied to these data attributes. So each one had a score, right? It was ranked, so it's an ordinal data. And then we see all those different violations. This is nominal. Then we have the dates, the time, right? And so which level of measurement are they in? And time is always a little tricky because it's, circular for one thing. And there's measured in weeks or months, or so there's different ways. So we're gonna kind of bracket that one for a second, come back to that. The next question, what is the nature of this geographic phenomenon we want to map? So who's seen this graphic or ever come across this one before? Yeah, this is one of the really key graphics by a professor of cartography at Penn State, Alan McEachran. There's lots of different ways we can thematically symbolize and represent geographic phenomena. And we see all these here. You might recognize dot maps or proportional symbol maps. Choropleth is the most common one, right? The one we see for election maps and this kind of thing. isolines. Well, so how do we know which one of those to pick when we're going to make a map? And he provides this very interesting way to think about the actual phenomena. And we can think about, is it a continuous phenomena or is it discrete? Does it exist abruptly or does it exist smooth? So this is a kind of academic conceptual tool that we can think about as we move forward in trying to map these data. So if you're not aware, there's been an explosion of open source web-based visualization tools and mapping tools that have hit the scene in the last 5 years especially. There's probably 50 or 100 of these, and there's some research that I've done to kind of boil it down to kind of figure out which ones are the best ones, and so these are the most popular here. The point is though to understand the process more than a particular tool, because even though Leaflet or this Mapbox 1 or D3 might be hot today, chances are in a couple years there'll be something else that'll kind of replace it. What's important is to understand this process and workflow and the concepts behind this stuff. So I've gone through the data part a little bit. I've introduced how we're going to start representing these thematically, which I've already gestured at, the ability of these mapping libraries and APIs to get this to do this for us. So this is the example of the Leaflet library here. We're going to see a demo of this data using this in a next session. But these are very kind of easy point of entries for people. The nice tutorials that allow you to, here we can make that choropleth map. Here we can get the data in there and do this. I'm not going to define a lot of specific terms. I hope that we can have time for Q&A, especially when we get more into the nitty-gritty with the other ones. But we hear this word API a lot. Who's heard API? Okay, we use this all the time, and I just wanted to define it for us as clearly as I can because I think it's important. So this is this library called Leaflet, and these are all these different this functionality it can give us. So we don't have to code everything by hand. We don't want to do that. These is done by very smart people, better programmers than we are. But we can see it's involving things like lat long, and it can have points and icons and then other controls, zooming and interaction stuff. So it offers all this functionality. So it does this through what's called an API. So let me just briefly define this. When we talk about interfaces, there's really two types. There's the interface between a human and a computer. And this is the one that we're most concerned with as designers and developers. This is the interface that we want to make useful, right? We want to provide affordances for the user. We want it to change when the user wants something. There's another interface between computers and computers, between scripts and scripts, between applications and applications. This is the application programming interface. So this is when the two computers are talking to each other. So I've built a map, and it's in my web browser. And now it's going to make use. It's going to go out and take advantage of a script written by the makers of Leaflet. So this is what offers us the power and the control of these libraries today, is to harness all this great code that someone else has already written. So a lot of those mapping libraries are going to kind of fall in this part of the workflow here. But it's not just as simple as grabbing that code and pasting it in. This isn't necessarily just a point and click kind of thing. Rather, we have to customize that code. We have to write our own code. We have to become familiar and fluent with a range of technologies. These are generally known as the Open Web Platform. And so I'm not going to go into detail about these, but if you want to go down this route and you want to master this stuff, you're going to have to become familiar with nearly all of these terms. This is what we use to customize the map and take it beyond just the classic kind of Google pushpin map. One more note about the interaction. And so we've got our data symbolized in various ways. Maybe we decided to make some proportional symbols to show which restaurant had the most violations. So we can now look at a spatial distribution of this data, and we can know, oh, the data is being clustered over here. There's a lot of violations maybe in this neighborhood. We can start to answer certain questions now that the data is visually represented on a map. Why do we add interaction? Interaction is a third element. And this, I started with that quote by Paul Rand, excuse me. And he said design was form and content put together. I'm going to suggest that we need to modify his articulation and add one more, and that's interactivity. So today we have form represented by such things as the HTML and the CSS. We have the style rules being controlled by the CSS. And then we have interaction, we have change that happens through the JavaScript or another programming language like this. So yeah, to conclude, I guess I want to come back to that question I started with, which was what is design? I suggested that this is a problem-solving approach to mapping. And so we can think about what problems we want to solve that we encounter out in our daily lives. And if I could just plug what we're doing here today, I'll say this is a very exciting field right now that cartography kind of hit maybe a lull for a little while, and enabled by these new mapping technologies, these geospatial technologies, it's really taking off today. So it's a great opportunity to learn, and I will say that the learning curve may appear very steep, and there's a lot of terms to learn, but kind of offering roadmaps like this and then offering a support community to help answer questions, you can really gain a lot. There were several people I met here last summer who had never heard of any of these things. 1 year later, I come back and suddenly they're making web maps, they're designing, they're developing. So this is a very exciting time for this. I'll take any questions now. Thank you.